Chapter 1. The Return. The town sign hadn't changed. Welcome to Sweetbriar Ridge, home of apple blossoms and big hearts. Charlotte Charlie Evans slowed her sleek silver rental car to a crawl, drinking in the familiar cursive lettering against the weathered wooden board. The sign stood proudly at the town entrance, framed by a cascade of pink and white apple blossoms that drifted lazily in the late spring breeze. Something twisted in her chest, sharper than nostalgia, heavier than dread. She eased her foot off the brake, allowing the car to drift forward onto the winding country road, flanked by golden poplars whose leaves whispered secrets in the afternoon light. White picket fences lined the lane, some freshly painted, others charmingly worn by weather and time, just like the memories that clung to this place, refusing to fade despite her best efforts. 7 miles and 10 years, she murmured, fingers tightening around the steering wheel until her knuckles blanched white. Not so far after all. The knot in her stomach had been there since she'd left Chicago behind, along with a half-empty apartment, a diamond ring returned in its velvet box, and a career that suddenly felt as hollow as the promises Jason had made. She'd packed a duffel bag full of uncertainty and silence, every zipper straining under things she couldn't quite name, programmed the GPS, and pointed herself toward the one place she'd sworn never to call home again. Charlie rolled down the window, letting the sweet apple-scented air wash over her. Her city lungs felt almost shocked by the purity of it. No exhaust fumes, no restaurant grease, just earth and flowers and something indefinably Sweetbriar. The familiar scent tugged at her heart, unwrapping memories she'd carefully packed away in the darkest corners of her mind. The tires crunched over the gravel as she passed Sweet Cream Dairy, now painted a cheerful buttercup yellow instead of its former clinical white. The faded mural of smiling Holstein cows still decorated the side wall, their cartoon eyes seeming to follow her as she drove past. Mr. Calloway still had his rocking chair on the porch, though it appeared he'd finally replaced the sagging wicker seat. A young woman, his granddaughter maybe, waved from behind the counter inside. Charlie lifted her hand in an awkward half-wave, suddenly conscious of being both recognized and a stranger. Of belonging nowhere, really. Her gaze drifted to the red-roofed church steeple that poked above the ridge like a cardinal perched among the trees. Sunday picnics on the lawn, Christmas pageants where she'd played an angel with tinfoil wings. Her parents' funeral, where Mabel had gripped her hand so tightly it left marks that lingered for days. Then there was the corner bookstore, its bay window showcasing a pyramid of new releases beneath a string of fairy lights. Walker's books and brews. She slowed involuntarily, peering through the windshield. Same hand-painted sign, though the ampersand had been retouched in gold leaf. A new outdoor seating area with mismatched chairs and potted lavender plants. And a glimpse of something that made her breath catch, the distinctive tilt of a dark head behind the counter. Charlie accelerated, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird seeking escape. She deliberately avoided looking at the old oak tree by Miller's Pond, or the picnic table where she and Ethan Walker had carved their initials after summer bonfires. Where he'd first kissed her when they were 16, tasting of marshmallows and possibility. Where she'd told him at 18 that she was leaving for Northwestern University, watching his face go carefully blank even as his fingers tightened around hers. She'd convinced herself those choices meant freedom. Now they felt more like a different kind of cage. Ancient history, she told herself firmly, refocusing on the road ahead with a hard swallow. Mabel's place lay just down the hill, past the apple orchard. Charlie could see it now, nestled in a gentle valley like something from a storybook. The white farmhouse with its wraparound porch, weathered blue shutters that needed touching up, and the ancient maple tree that had hosted 3 generations of tire swings. Her grandmother had sounded robust on the phone, despite tales of a sprained hip and needing just a little help around the house sugar. Charlie didn't believe it for a second. Mabel Evans had the constitution of an ox and the willfulness of a mountain goat. At 74, she still chased deer off her back porch with a broom and climbed ladders to clean her own gutters. But something in her voice, a note of wistfulness beneath the cheerful banter, had struck a chord with Charlie. That, combined with burnout from planning one too many society weddings, including what would have been her own, and the spectacular implosion of her engagement to Jason, "I need space but actually I'm sleeping with my assistant," Parker, had been enough to bring Charlie home. Temporarily, 2 weeks, maximum. Just until Mabel's hip healed, and Charlie figured out which pieces of her life she wanted to pick up again. She pulled into the gravel driveway, tires crunching a greeting. The white farmhouse stood silently watching her return, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like knowing eyes. The wraparound porch with its faded blue floorboards still held the old rocking chair that creaked whenever the wind rolled through, currently swaying gently as if occupied by a ghost of her former self. The apple orchard to the right shimmered in spring sunshine, pink and white blossoms dusting the ground like confetti after a parade. The sweet scent drifted through her open window, mingling with the earthy smell of freshly turned garden soil. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound echoing across the valley with painful familiarity. Charlie took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, her sensible heels immediately sinking into the soft dirt. She looked down ruefully at her smart navy trousers and cream silk blouse, a costume that felt increasingly absurd with each passing mile from Chicago. City chic. Event planner polish. Not exactly practical for Sweetbriar Ridge's gravel drives and dirt paths. But she'd always been the girl who wore stilettos to the feed store and painted her nails cherry red before helping with cattle auctions. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. The screen door snapped open with a familiar twang of spring metal, followed by the thump of determined footsteps. "Took you long enough," Mabel Evans called out, a mischievous grin tucked beneath a crown of silver curls. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten cold feet and turned around at the county line." Her grandmother stood at the top of the porch steps, hands planted on hips that had widened only slightly with age. She wore faded denim overalls over a floral blouse, red reading glasses perched on top of her head, and yellow gardening gloves stained with dirt. Not a single sign of injury or frailty, exactly as Charlie had suspected. "Well," Charlie said, smiling despite herself, "I had to stop 3 times, 2 construction zones and 1 llama parade, apparently." Mabel limped down the steps without a hint of actual pain. "Wasn't that cute? That's the Thompson kids' new 4-H project. The llamas, not the construction. Though heaven knows we need both around here." Charlie's eyebrows lifted. "Are you sure you're injured? Or is this just a guilt trap wrapped in homespun charm?" "Would I lie to my favorite granddaughter?" Mabel's blue eyes, the same shade as Charlie's, twinkled as she pulled Charlie into a hug that smelled of lavender soap and cinnamon. "I'm your only granddaughter. And still my favorite." Mabel stepped back, studying Charlie's face with a grandmother's penetrating gaze. "You look tired, sugar. And too thin. Has that fancy city job been working you to the bone?" Charlie avoided her eyes. "I've been busy." "Mm-hmm." Mabel clearly wasn't buying it. "And that fiancé of yours? The investment banker with the teeth?" "Jason," Charlie swallowed. "We broke up, I told you on the phone." "You mentioned taking a break. That's different from broken." "Well, when your fiancé takes a break with his 24-year-old assistant in Aruba, I think that qualifies as broken." Mabel's face softened. "Oh, honey. It's fine." Charlie forced a smile that felt brittle enough to crack her face. "Better to find out before the wedding than after, right? Now get inside before your sprained hip catches a chill." Mabel kissed her cheek, her lips papery soft against Charlie's skin. "Come on in. I made lemon bars, and the tea's already cold." Charlie followed her through the screen door, the familiar creak and slap transporting her back to summers spent running in and out, screen door banging behind her until Mabel threatened to take it off its hinges. The house wrapped around her like a well-worn quilt, each room a memory, each crack in the wall a story. The entryway still held the oak hall tree where generations of Evan's family coats and hats had hung. Charlie's fingers brushed the lowest hook, her hook from when she was too small to reach higher. Past the living room with its sagging floral couch and knitted afghans, the house opened into a kitchen that hadn't changed in 20 years. Sunlight streamed through faded gingham curtains, catching dust motes that danced in the golden beams. The worn wooden table, scarred from hot pans and homework pencils, stood exactly where it always had, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Mason jars of wildflowers lined the windowsill, their purple and yellow blooms nodding in the breeze. The old farmhouse sink gleamed beneath the window that overlooked Mabel's vegetable garden, rows of tomato plants standing at attention like tiny soldiers. Charlie ran her fingers along the table's edge, feeling each nick and groove. She could still hear Ethan's laugh, boyish, unguarded, dancing between the dust motes like it had never left. The memory of sitting here with him, studying for AP biology while stealing kisses when Mabel wasn't looking, washed over her like a wave. Her gaze caught on something she hadn't noticed before, a framed photograph on the wall she'd somehow missed. Charlie and Ethan at graduation, his arm around her waist, both of them beaming in blue caps and gowns. Her eyes lingered on their faces, so young, so certain of everything. 1 week before, she'd told him she was leaving. 2 weeks before, he'd stopped answering her calls. The sight hit her like a physical blow, her carefully constructed composure cracking. She turned away quickly, blinking back sudden, unwelcome moisture. "Don't go there," she warned herself. "Sit, sugar," Mabel said, setting down a plate of lemon bars with powdered sugar so thick it formed tiny clouds when she breathed near them. "I've got sweet tea, gossip, and news." Charlie arched an eyebrow, sliding into her old chair. "What kind of news?" "Well," Mabel sat across from her, cupping her mason jar of tea between weathered hands. "The Apple Blossom Festival's fallen on hard times, budget cuts, low turnout last year. The town council's been pinching pennies like they're going extinct, and people aren't volunteering like they used to. Folks have been wondering if this year's might be our last." Charlie reached for a lemon bar, the tart sweetness familiar on her tongue. "That's a shame," she said, brushing sugar from her fingers. "I remember winning the pie bake-off with that blackberry mess where I burned the crust." Mabel grinned, crow's feet deepening around her eyes. "You won because the judges liked your presentation. You stacked the pies like some kind of modern art installation." "I was going through a phase," Charlie laughed. "I'd just discovered Martha Stewart and thought I was revolutionary." "And now you're a professional event planner for fancy Chicago folks." Mabel took a sip of tea, ice cubes clinking against the glass. Her eyes held a gleam that Charlie recognized all too well. "With all that experience, seems to me you'd be the perfect person to help bring the festival back to life." Charlie froze mid-sip. "Mabel, I may have mentioned to Mayor Richardson that you'd be available." "Mabel, and that you're staying for a bit. And how long might a bit be, according to you?" Charlie placed her cup down slowly, the glass making a soft thunk against the wooden table. "However long it takes, sugar. The festival's in 3 weeks." "I told you 2 weeks maximum. I have to be back in Chicago for the Hendricks wedding consultation." Mabel smiled sweetly, patting Charlie's hand. "Funny thing, life doesn't always wait for consultations." Before Charlie could argue further, the rumble of a truck engine cut through the peaceful afternoon. She turned toward the window just in time to see an old blue pickup pull into the drive, headlights catching the low afternoon sun. The truck was familiar, the same one that used to idle outside her window at night, waiting to whisk her away to midnight swims and stargazing on blankets. Her mouth went dry. The driver's door opened with a creak that carried across the yard. Charlie's heart performed a gymnastics routine worthy of the Olympics. Ethan Walker stepped out, unfolding his tall frame from the cab. He was broader than she remembered, his shoulders filling out the blue flannel shirt in a way they hadn't at 18. His dark hair caught the sunlight, revealing threads of copper she'd forgotten existed. He'd rolled his sleeves to the elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with sawdust and a hint of what looked like fresh ink, a tattoo that hadn't been there when she left. He wore faded jeans with a worn leather belt, scuffed work boots, and an expression that shifted from relaxed to guarded the moment he spotted her through the screen door. His jaw flexed, a muscle twitching beneath the day-old stubble that shadowed his cheeks. Charlie stood frozen, one hand gripping the doorframe so tightly her knuckles went white. Her heart thundered in her ears, drowning out Mabel's knowing chuckle behind her. "Goodness," her grandmother said, "look who's here right on time." Charlie shot her a betrayed glance. "You didn't." "I most certainly did," Mabel replied, unrepentant. "Porch needs fixing. Who better than the best carpenter in the county?" "Anyone else?" Charlie muttered. But it was too late. Ethan had reached the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her with those eyes, a clear hazel that shifted between green and gold depending on the light. Right now they were guarded, the gold flecks catching the afternoon sun. "Charlie," he said, voice low, deep, too calm for the storm rolling inside her. He looked like a man who'd learned to control his emotions, to tuck them away beneath the surface where they couldn't hurt him. The boy she'd known had worn every feeling on his face like an open book. "Ethan." A pause stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and unfinished sentences. "You're back," he finally said, a statement rather than a question. She swallowed. "Only for a bit." His mouth twitched, something painful flashing in his eyes. "That's what you said the night before you left for good." The words hung between them, heavy with memory. Charlie flinched visibly, her carefully constructed facade cracking further. His gaze travelled over her, taking in the designer blouse, the sleek ponytail, the manicured nails, before returning to her face. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps, of the girl she'd been beneath the woman she'd become. He looked past her. "Mabel said she needed porch repairs." "Do I look like someone who can swing a hammer?" Mabel chirped, appearing beside Charlie. She'd abandoned all pretense of limping. Ethan's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, Mum." "I'll get started." He brushed past Charlie with a faint scent of cedar, citrus, and something distinctly male that sent her nerve endings into overdrive. Their shoulders barely touched, but electricity arced between them, sharp and undeniable. She remained frozen on the steps, memories hitting like waves against shore rocks. The night she told him she was leaving for Northwestern. His face, shocked, then carefully blank, as she explained about the scholarship, the opportunities, how she needed to see something beyond Sweetbriar Ridge. The kiss on the orchard swing, desperate and salt-tinged with tears, neither of them acknowledged. The letter she'd written during freshman year, full of homesickness and confusion and a question he never answered. "Don't just stand there gawking," Mabel whispered behind her. "Go help him." Charlie turned sharply. "I'm not gawking." "You're practically drooling." "Mabel." "Charlotte." Their stare-off ended in mutual smirks, a genetic stubbornness recognizing its match. "Fine," Charlie sighed. "I'll help, but this doesn't mean I'm staying for the festival." "Of course not," Mabel agreed, not sounding convinced in the slightest. "Just being neighbourly." She paused, then added casually, "And don't forget to ask about little Gracie, sweetest child you'll ever meet, smart as a whip, just like her uncle." Charlie's steps faltered. "Uncle?" But Mabel had already disappeared inside, leaving Charlie with more questions than answers. She descended the steps, the heels of her leather pumps sinking into soft earth with each step. She knew she looked ridiculous, dressed for a downtown Chicago lunch meeting while standing in a farmyard, but she lifted her chin and walked toward Ethan with as much dignity as possible. He'd already unloaded tools from his truck, a carpenter's belt slung low on his hips. The sight of his strong hands checking the level of the porch railing sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "I'll help," she said, more to herself than to him. Ethan glanced up, surprise flickering across his features before he schooled them back to neutrality. He silently passed her a box of nails. She took them without a word, feeling the heat of his fingers, the static electricity that jumped between them. Her pulse quickened beneath her silk blouse, and she was suddenly very aware of how close they stood. "I didn't expect to see you here," Ethan finally said, voice measured as he tested a loose porch board. "I didn't expect to be here," she answered truthfully. "Mabel claimed she needed help." He snorted softly. "Your grandmother could outwork most men half her age." "So I gathered." She watched him work for a moment. "Mabel mentioned someone named Gracie." Ethan's hands stilled momentarily. His shoulders tensed, then relaxed with deliberate control. "My niece, Sarah's daughter." "Your sister had a baby?" Charlie couldn't hide her surprise. The Sarah she remembered had sworn off marriage and children, determined to travel the world as a photojournalist. 5 years ago? His voice softened slightly. "She's living in Portland now, but Gracie stays with me sometimes." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Sarah's husband died 2 years back. Car accident." "I'm sorry," Charlie said, meaning it. "I didn't know." Ethan nodded once, returning to his work. "No reason you would." The unspoken accusation hung between them. "You weren't here." A stretch of silence followed, broken only by the steady rhythm of Ethan's hammer against the porch boards. Each blow seemed to echo the cracks forming in Charlie's composure. "What about you?" Charlie asked, passing him nails as he worked. "You're still here." His shoulders tensed slightly. "Never left." "The bookstore," she began. "Dad passed it to me when his arthritis got bad." Ethan drove a nail with more force than necessary, the crack of wood splitting slightly beneath the pressure, like her heart had when she'd left him behind. "Made some changes. Added a coffee bar, monthly book clubs, weekend reading hours for kids. I saw the outdoor seating area. It looks nice." He nodded, attention fixed on the porch railing with its peeling paint and splinters, broken like the promises they'd once made. "People like having somewhere to sit that isn't their living room or the daisy chain cafe, especially in summer." Charlie watched his hands work, the confident movements of someone comfortable in his own skin. The Ethan she'd known had been a boy still finding his place. This man moved with certainty, with the quiet knowledge of who he was and where he belonged. She suddenly felt unmoored, adrift between worlds, no longer belonging in Sweetbriar Ridge, yet not fully at home in Chicago either. "And are those tattoos?" she asked, gesturing to the ink visible beneath his rolled sleeve. He glanced at his forearm where what appeared to be an intricate tree design wrapped around his wrist and disappeared beneath the fabric. "Got my first one in college. This one's newer, the old oak from Miller's Pond." Their eyes met briefly. That oak, their oak, where they'd carved initials and made promises neither had kept. "It's beautiful work," she said softly. "You always said you'd never get a tattoo." "People change, Charlie." His eyes held hers. "Some just do it farther away than others." The words stung, their weight settling in her chest like a stone. "Thanks." He turned back to his task, deliberately avoiding her gaze. "Jenna Thompson does amazing designs. She opened a shop where the old hardware store used to be." "Little Jenna Thompson, with the braces and the science fair volcanoes?" "Not so little anymore. She's got 2 kids now with Mark Healy." "Mark Healy? The quarterback who couldn't spell his own name?" Ethan grinned despite himself. "He's the high school football coach now. Still can't spell, but Jenna says he's a good dad." Charlie shook her head, smiling. "I've missed a lot." "That's what happens when you don't come home for 10 years. The words weren't accusatory, just matter of fact, but they landed like a slap. "I came back for Dad's funeral," she said quietly, her voice suddenly thick. "For 3 days." Ethan finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "You didn't even stay for the reception. Mrs. Henderson made your favorite lemon cake." Charlie's throat tightened. "I had deadlines. Important clients. We all have priorities, Charlie." His voice was soft, all the more devastating for its gentleness. "Yours just weren't here." Before she could respond, Mabel called from the doorway. "Lemonade break! And Ethan, you're staying for dinner. No arguments. I made pot roast." Ethan's expression softened. "Yes, Mom." "Need help setting the table?" Charlie asked, reaching for escape. Got it covered, Mabel replied with a wink that promised mischief. You two catch up. I'll call when it's ready. The screen door slapped shut behind her, leaving Charlie and Ethan alone in the golden afternoon light. Cicadas hummed in the nearby fields, and somewhere a cardinal called to its mate. She's not subtle, is she? Charlie said with a nervous laugh. Never has been. Ethan set down his hammer. Look, Charlie, we're both adults. We can be civil. It's a small town. We're bound to run into each other. Of course, she agreed quickly. Ancient history, right? Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, regret, or maybe something deeper. Is that what we are? History? The question hung between them, unanswered, as the porch swing creaked lonely in the breeze. Charlie turned away, unable to meet his gaze. I should check on Mabel. Charlie. His voice stopped her, gentle but firm. She looked back to find him studying her face. Why are you really here? She opened her mouth to give the practiced answer. Mabel's hip, a short visit, professional obligations waiting in Chicago. But what came out instead surprised them both. I don't know where else to go. Her voice was a whisper, thin and fragile. Everything I built feels hollow. The confession hung between them, raw and honest in a way they hadn't been in years. Ethan's face softened, a glimpse of the boy she'd once known peeking through the man's reserved exterior. That's a start. The sun dipped behind the orchard, casting long shadows across the lawn and bathing the porch in amber light. It caught in Ethan's dark hair, highlighting those copper strands that had always fascinated her. Well, he said, gripping his hammer. Welcome back. The words hung between them, an olive branch offered across a decade of silence. Charlie took it with a tentative smile. Thanks. As Ethan returned to his repairs and she perched on the porch swing, watching his capable hands restore what time had worn away, she wondered if some things could be fixed as easily as a broken railing or a squeaky step. If second chances could bloom as reliably as Sweetbriar Ridge's apple blossoms. If coming home, even temporarily, might heal more than just Mabel's fictional injury. The evening air carried the scent of pot roast and possibility as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Charlie closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of Ethan's hammer and the creak of the porch swing lull her into a sense of peace she hadn't felt in longer than she cared to admit. Charlie, Mabel called from inside, come help with these potatoes. She rose, dusting off her trousers. Duty calls. Ethan nodded, not looking up from his work. Some things never change. And some things do, she replied softly, more to herself than to him. As she walked into the house that had shaped her, leaving behind the man who once knew her better than anyone, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that Sweetbriar Ridge and the Apple Blossom Festival was about to give her much more than she'd bargained for. Behind her, the porch swing swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if nodding in knowing agreement. Chapter 2. Ghosts and Glimmers. The hinges creaked in protest as Charlie nudged open the bedroom door, revealing a world perfectly preserved in amber. Her childhood bedroom stood frozen in time, untouched since the day she'd left for college with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and dreams stacked higher than the clouds that had hung low over Sweetbriar Ridge that morning. She stepped inside, her bare feet sinking into the familiar braided rug. A patchwork circle of blues and creams that Mabel had made from old denim and faded curtains. The walls remained butter yellow, still speckled with faded posters of 90s heartthrobs and inspirational quotes she'd carefully scribbled in metallic gel pens during late-night study sessions. A worn pine bookshelf leaned slightly in one corner, shelves sagging under the weight of dog-eared teen romance novels, half-finished journals with cracked spines, and dusty knickknacks collected from county fairs and school trips. Her old ballet slippers, pink satin now faded to the colour of dried roses, dangled from the closet door handle, ribbons frayed like promises left unfulfilled. Beside them hung the gauzy blue scarf she'd worn to her first real date with Ethan, At the drive-in movie theater one town over, Charlie's fingers reached for it instinctively, brushing against the soft fabric. She brought it to her face, eyes closing as she inhaled. The faintest trace of her teenage perfume still lingered, along with something else, something that made her heart twist in recognition. The room smelled faintly of lavender sachets and lemon furniture polish, comforting, familiar, like Mabel's embrace or hot cocoa on snow days, like innocence, long since shed in exchange for sophistication that suddenly felt hollow. Charlie's fingers trailed along the windowsill where she used to sit watching for Ethan's truck, counting the minutes until he'd appear at the bend in the road. The glass still had the tiny heart she'd scratched with her class ring, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. She crossed to the vanity, its white paint chipped at the corners, revealing layers of previous colours beneath, like archaeology of her childhood. Her fingers brushed along the scalloped edge where she used to play with drugstore lip gloss and write letters she never found the courage to send. The centre drawer stuck slightly. She jiggled it loose and, inside, found a tangle of photos bound with a faded blue ribbon. Her heart stuttered against her ribs. At the top of the stack was a picture from senior prom, her in a pale blue dress that shimmered like moonlight on water, her hair swept up with tendrils framing her face. Ethan stood beside her in a borrowed tux that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders, his hair too neatly combed, his hands awkward but reverent at her waist. His smile had been pure and open, his eyes fixed on her face like she was the answer to questions he hadn't even known to ask. Hers full of unspoken dreams and secret plans. She sank onto the edge of her bed, photo trembling slightly in her hands. The mattress sighed beneath her, an old friend remembering her shape. The quilt, faded apples stitched in concentric patterns, felt just as soft as she remembered. God, she whispered to the empty room. We were so young. So young and so certain they had everything figured out. She remembered how his hand had lingered just a second too long on her back during their prom photos. How the warmth of his palm had sent shivers across her skin. How she'd looked up at him beneath the twinkling lights of the school gymnasium and thought, this could be everything. She'd kissed him that night, beneath the stars at Miller's Pond, surrounded by the scent of apple blossoms and possibility. And a week later, she'd told him she was leaving for Northwestern. That Sweetbriar Ridge was too small for her dreams. She hadn't looked back, had barely allowed herself to wonder what might have been if she'd stayed. If she'd chosen him over Chicago's gleaming promise. Now, the look in his eyes that afternoon, guarded, calm, older, felt like a consequence. Maybe a deserved one. Charlie carefully rewrapped the photos and returned them to the drawer, but not before noticing the folded letter beneath them, her handwriting on the envelope. Ethan. The letter she'd written during her first semester at college, her heart aching with homesickness and doubt, the one she'd eventually mailed after weeks of rewriting, after tears had smudged the ink in places. I miss the way the stars look from Miller's Pond. Chicago has too many lights. I miss the sound of your laugh. I wonder if we made a mistake. She'd never received a response. Not a call. Not a letter. Just silence that grew until it felt like its own answer. She slid the drawer shut with more force than necessary. That night, as she curled beneath the faded quilt, the scent of fabric softener and nostalgia wrapped around her like a cocoon. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind tumbled through memories and mistakes, hopes and heartbreaks, until she finally drifted into a fitful dream. She was back in her Chicago high-rise, the 63rd floor with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a glittering city sprawl. Her engagement ring caught the light, throwing fractured rainbows across the marble countertop. Jason smiled as he handed her a glass of champagne, his perfect teeth gleaming, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that had once made her heart flutter. "To us," he said, but his voice sounded hollow, echoing strangely. As he spoke, the city lights outside the window began to shift, transforming into twinkling fairy lights strung through apple trees. The champagne in her glass turned cloudy, then clear as water reflecting moonlight. Then the scene shifted. Her office, stark white and minimal. The email notification chiming. The one with the photo attachment she'd opened without thinking. Jason. Her assistant, Melanie. A hotel room in Aruba. His lips on Melanie's neck, his hand sliding beneath fabric meant for Caribbean sunshine, not Chicago fluorescence. The betrayal hit fresh like a slap. The same sickening drop in her stomach, the same thundering pulse in her ears. But this time, instead of Jason's face blurring with tears, it morphed into Ethan's. Young, hurt, watching her pack her car for college. "I'll call every day," Dream Charlie promised, but her voice came out wrong, distorted. Her engagement ring grew heavy, impossibly heavy, pulling her hand down. When she looked at it again, the diamond had transformed into a wilting apple blossom. "Different betrayals," Ethan's voice, or was it Jason's, whispered. Same pain. She jolted awake, breath ragged, heart racing. Sweat dampened her hairline despite the cool spring night air drifting through the cracked window. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic rhythm beneath her palm gradually slow. "Different betrayals," she whispered into the dark, as if saying it aloud might make it less true. "Different choices." But was leaving Ethan behind really so different from what Jason had done to her? Both had made promises. Both had broken them for something that seemed more exciting, more important. Morning sunlight eventually streamed through the lace curtains, turning the room golden and chasing away the shadows of her restless night. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, stretching sore muscles and tangled thoughts. She dressed quickly in jeans that felt strange after years of pencil skirts, boots she found in the back of her closet, and a soft cream sweater tucked in her old drawer. Something about dressing down made her feel a little more like herself, or perhaps more like the self she might have been if she'd stayed. Downstairs, the scent of cinnamon toast and fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, but Charlie veered toward the porch, needing air and space to clear her head. The rhythmic sound of hammering started before she opened the door. There he was, Ethan, balanced on a ladder, fixing the loose gutter Mabel had pointed out the day before. The early morning sun backlit his figure, turning the edges of his silhouette golden. His focus was intense, sleeves rolled to reveal tanned forearms, jaw set in concentration, movements sure and deliberate as he secured the metal trough that had come loose in last week's storm. Charlie cleared her throat, suddenly self-conscious in her casual clothes and sleep-tousled hair. He paused mid-swing, looking over his shoulder. His eyes swept over her, registering the change in attire with a slight lift of his eyebrow. "Morning," he said, voice gruff from the early hour. "Morning," she echoed, squinting against the light. "Didn't think you'd be back so soon." "Figured I'd finish the job before Mabel takes the ladder herself." He secured one last nail with a sharp tap. "She's already tried twice. Found her out here at dawn with a toolbox and determination." Charlie chuckled, leaning against the porch rail. "Sounds like her. Stubborn runs in the family." "I've noticed." The corners of his mouth twitched with what might have been a smile. He climbed down with the quiet grace of someone who spent his life balancing on rooftops and fences. Nothing like the gangly boy who'd once fallen out of the apple tree trying to impress her. He folded the ladder with practiced ease, then leaned the hammer against the porch rail, close enough that she caught the faint scent of his soap, something with citrus and cedar. "I was thinking," he began, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "About the festival. It's a mess. Budget's in ruins. No coordinated plan. Half the vendors backed out when the council cut the advertising budget." Charlie folded her arms, partly to create distance, partly to stop herself from reaching out to brush a wood shaving from his shoulder. "I gathered as much from Mabel's hints." "I can help," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "I've built half the booths over the years, managed the firework permits, got contacts with most of the local suppliers." A pause. "And Gracie's obsessed with the lantern walk, been talking about it since February." At the mention of his niece, his expression softened, revealing a glimpse of the boy she'd known beneath the man's reserved exterior. Charlie raised an eyebrow, considering. Business partners, then? He nodded, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Strictly business. Her lips twitched. Of course. An awkward pause hung between them, filled with chirping birds and the distant sound of a tractor in the fields, before the porch door banged open with enough force to make them both jump. "About time you two stopped glowering and started planning," Mabel hollered, triumphant in her flannel robe and fuzzy slippers. "I signed you both up for the town hall meeting this morning. Mayor Liz wants the new committee leads to report in." Charlie turned, suspicion narrowing her eyes. New leads? Mabel held up a flyer, waving it like a victory flag. "Co-chairs, you and Ethan. The festival committee voted last night." Charlie blinked, stunned. "Without asking me." "Or me," Ethan added, though he didn't sound particularly surprised. Mabel grinned, unrepentant. "Consider this penance for fleeing town and abandoning the peach cobbler contest for 10 years, young lady." She fixed Charlie with a pointed look. "Besides, who better to save our little festival than the big city event planner and the man who's kept this town's traditions alive single-handedly?" Charlie groaned, a protest forming on her lips, but Ethan was already heading toward his truck, keys jingling in his hand. "Town hall's in 20 minutes, he called over his shoulder. "You riding with me or taking your rental?" She hesitated, weighing the awkwardness of a car ride together against the embarrassment of arriving separately to an event they were apparently co-chairing. "I'll ride with you," she decided, following him down the steps. Might as well present a united front. His truck smelled exactly as she remembered, leather, coffee, and a hint of sawdust. The dashboard still held the tiny jade elephant she'd given him for luck before his driving test. She stared at it, surprised he'd kept something so small, so insignificant after all this time. The drive into town was quiet, broken only by Ethan's occasional comment about changes to landmarks they passed. The old Miller farm converted to a lavender field, the new code playground equipment at the elementary school, the community garden behind the church where seniors taught kids to grow vegetables. Town hall looked the same as ever, slightly crooked stone steps worn smooth by generations of feet, the front lawn overrun with Mrs. Whittaker's prize peonies, and inside, the same creaky wooden floors that echoed too loudly when heels struck them. Charlie sat beside Ethan in the third row, acutely aware of their elbows almost touching on the shared armrest. The wooden benches filled quickly with familiar faces, some aged, some new, all turning to stare at her with varying degrees of curiosity and surprise. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery gave her a warm wave. Old Mr. Peterson squinted at her like he was trying to place her face. Jenna Thompson, looking nothing like the awkward teen Charlie remembered, offered a friendly nod from where she sat with 2 small children. Charlie caught fragments of whispers behind her. "Evan's girl, finally back. Heard her fancy fiancé in Chicago. Wonder if she'll stay this time." She straightened her spine, pretending not to hear, though each word landed like a tiny dart against her skin. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, that they were talking about her, or that they were right to question her commitment. Mayor Liz Carmichael, who had been the high school English teacher during Charlie's time, stood at the podium clutching her binder like a lifeline. Her auburn hair now held generous streaks of silver, but her eyes remained sharp behind stylish glasses as they zeroed in on Charlie. "Before we get to the budget concerns and vendor applications," she announced, "we're thrilled to announce that Charlotte Evans and Ethan Walker will be co-chairing this year's Apple Blossom Festival." Applause erupted, some polite, some enthusiastic. Charlie caught a few knowing glances between older residents who remembered her and Ethan as high school sweethearts. Her cheeks flushed hot. Ethan merely nodded, his face impassive save for a slight tightening around his eyes. "Charlie," Mayor Liz continued, an unexpected spotlight making Charlie shift uncomfortably. "We're especially excited to have your expertise. I still remember those constellation backdrops you created for the winter formal. Pure magic. Perhaps you could bring some of that same imagination back to our little town's biggest event?" The implied pressure hung in the air. "Prove you haven't forgotten us completely." Charlie smiled tightly and nodded, feeling every eye in the room assess whether the prodigal daughter was worth the anticipation. The meeting droned on. Budget concerns, security arrangements, weather contingency plans. Charlie found herself taking mental notes, her event planner instincts kicking in despite her reservations. They've placed the food vendors directly across from the children's activity area, she thought, eyeing the map displayed at the front of the room. Recipe for disaster, sticky hands on every booth in between. And why put the live music stage downwind of the petting zoo? She itched to rearrange the entire layout, mentally calculating traffic flow patterns and shade coverage throughout the day. 10 years planning everything from corporate galas to society weddings had honed her eye for potential problems. Beside her, Ethan contributed occasionally, practical suggestions about booth placement, vendor relationships, the timing of the fireworks display. His deep voice, steady and thoughtful, commanded respect from the room. These people trusted him, Charlie realized. He'd earned their confidence while she'd been building a life elsewhere. Afterward, as they stood outside sipping lemon water from paper cups, Charlie found herself surrounded by former classmates and neighbors, all eager to welcome her home, however temporarily. Mrs. Henderson insisted she stop by the bakery for proper catching up. Jenna Thompson invited her to the monthly book club at Ethan's store. Even gruff Mr. Peterson warmed enough to remind her that the festival needed a young person's touch. Do I even deserve this welcome? Charlie wondered, smiling through introductions while guilt gnawed at her edges. I'm the one who left. I'm the one who barely looked back. She was responding to Mayor Liz's questions about Chicago event trends when she felt a gentle tug at her sleeve. Hi, said a small voice. Charlie turned to find a girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with a riot of dark curls barely contained by a unicorn headband. She wore oversized glasses with purple frames, overalls covered in paint smudges, and yellow rain boots despite the clear sky. Her solemn expression was at odds with her whimsical appearance. Charlie knelt instinctively, bringing herself to eye level. Hey there. I'm Gracie, the girl said, studying Charlie with intense hazel eyes that were unmistakably familiar. Uncle Ethan says you used to win all the baking contests. Charlie laughed, surprised, and touched that Ethan had mentioned her at all. He exaggerates. I only won the pie division twice, and once was because Mrs. Henderson had the flu. Gracie considered this information seriously. Do you like fairy lights? The twinkly kind, not the big bulbs. Charlie blinked at the abrupt change of subject. Very much. I use them in almost every event I plan in Chicago. Good, Gracie said with a sage nod that made her seem far older than her years. I think the lantern walk should have floating candles in the pond and fairy lights in the trees. It's more magical that way. Last year was nice, but not magical. She emphasized the word with dramatic flair. Charlie smiled, charmed by the girl's earnestness. You have excellent taste, Miss Gracie. Magical is exactly what we should aim for. Her mind was already spinning with possibilities. Strings of delicate lights woven through tree branches, flameless candles in paper boats drifting across Miller's Pond, perhaps even some subtle uplighting to cast apple blossoms in a rosy glow. For the first time since arriving in Sweetbriar Ridge, Charlie felt a genuine spark of creative excitement. We could add paper stars too, Charlie suggested, hanging from the lower branches, and maybe some soft music. Gracie beamed, revealing a missing front tooth, before darting away to join a group of children playing tag on the town hall lawn. Charlie watched her go, struck by how much her expressions mirrored Ethan's, the same thoughtful furrow between her brows, the same decisive nod. She's got opinions about everything, Ethan said quietly, appearing at Charlie's side. From breakfast cereal to astrophysics. Charlie glanced up at him. She's absolutely delightful. She's been through a lot, he continued, watching his niece with a tenderness that made Charlie's heart twist. Took a while to get her to come out of her shell after Sarah. He trailed off, swallowing hard. Well, losing a parent changes a kid. The unspoken words hung between them. Charlie knew all too well what losing parents felt like. She'd been older than Gracie when her parents' car had slid off the icy road one February night, but the hollow ache had been no less devastating. "You're good with her," Charlie said softly. "She clearly adores you." He shrugged, but pride warmed his eyes. "She's easy to love. Smart as a whip, too. Already reading at a 6th grade level." "Must be all those books you surround her with," Charlie offered, remembering how Ethan had always carried a paperback in his back pocket, even during football practice. Their shoulders brushed as they both turned to watch Gracie, the brief contact sending a surprising jolt through Charlie. Neither moved away immediately, their arms touching just lightly enough to feel the warmth between them. A soft moment passed between them, not quite comfortable, but not uncomfortable either. A careful truce. Charlie sipped her drink, turning back to the subject at hand. "She's right, by the way. Fairy lights and floating candles. We should aim for magic, especially for the lantern walk. That's the heart of the festival." "You always did have an eye for the magical touches," Ethan said quietly, his gaze drifting to her face. "Remember those stars you painted on the winter formal backdrop? People talked about them for years." The fact that he remembered such a small detail, her painstaking work on tiny glow-in-the-dark constellations, sent a warm flutter through her chest. "I'll take that as a compliment to my event planning skills," she said lightly, though the weight of shared history made her voice soft. "Take it however you want," he replied, but there was no edge to his words. The festival could use some of that Charlie Evans magic. They stood in silence, watching Gracie chase a friend around the gazebo, her laughter carrying across the square. The tension between them had shifted, not gone but transformed into something more navigable. The kind of silence that acknowledged the past without letting it poison the present. "We should probably start making lists," she said finally, turning back to Ethan. "Vendors to contact, supplies to order, volunteers to coordinate." He nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Back to business, then?" "Strictly business," she echoed, but neither of them sounded convinced. As they walked toward his truck, Gracie ran up and slipped her small hand into Ethan's, looking up at Charlie with those solemn eyes. "Are you staying for the whole festival?" she asked bluntly, swinging from her uncle's arm. Charlie hesitated, caught between honesty and the hope shining in the little girl's face. "I'm here to help make it special," she answered carefully. "Good," Gracie declared with another decisive nod. "Because Uncle Ethan says the lantern walk isn't the same without someone who believes in wishes." Charlie's eyes met Ethan's over Gracie's head, a question in their blue depths. Something flickered across his face, vulnerability breaking through his careful composure. He looked away quickly, a muscle working in his jaw as if Gracie had revealed something too personal, too raw. "Kids remember the darndest things," he murmured, his voice rougher than before. But they both knew what Gracie was referring to, the old Sweetbriar legend that wishes made during the lantern walk came true if your heart was true. Charlie and Ethan had made wishes every year, whispering them to the flame before setting their lanterns adrift. Had his wishes been like hers? Had they come true? As they drove back toward Mabel's house, with Gracie chattering between them about unicorns and the science fair and how Mrs. Henderson was teaching her to make apple turnovers, Charlie found herself smiling more genuinely than she had in months. Her hand accidentally brushed against Ethan's as they both reached to adjust the radio, and neither pulled away quite as quickly as they might have. Perhaps some wishes just took longer to find their way home. Chapter 3. Festival Beginnings. The Sweetbriar Ridge Community Centre buzzed with afternoon activity, humming like a beehive in spring. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced above the crowd of familiar faces. The scent of lemon cookies, Mrs. Henderson's contribution, mingled with pine-scented floor polish and the distinctive aroma of coffee brewed too long in an ancient percolator. Folding chairs scraped across wooden floors as townsfolk found their seats, a patchwork quilt of denim, flannel and floral blouses filling the space. Whispers and laughter bounced off the walls, punctuated by the occasional squeal of children darting between rows. At the long conference table up front, cluttered with notepads, clipboards, and the obligatory wicker basket of butterscotch candies, Charlie stood with rigid posture, arms crossed over her chest, jaw tight, presentation folder clutched like a shield. Beside her, Ethan leaned back in his metal chair with a casual ease that made her both envious and exasperated. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth as he greeted neighbours with nods and quiet words. Charlie cleared her throat, tapping a pen against the table until the room quieted. This was familiar territory, commanding attention, controlling a room. She'd done it countless times in sleek Chicago conference centres. But familiarity didn't always mean comfort. Something about facing this crowd, people who'd known her since she wore pigtails and braces, made her stomach flutter with an unfamiliar nervousness. "Okay," Charlie began, pasting on her best polished smile, the one that had convinced skeptical CEOs to double their event budgets. "To revitalise the Apple Blossom Festival, I've drafted a comprehensive plan based on current event trends." She flipped open her folder and unfolded a large, colour-coded layout map. "I propose a fresh design concept, string lighting shaped like apple blossoms throughout the square, a social media photo wall with live uploads to increase our digital footprint, artisan booths with QR codes for online ordering, and a modern food truck court featuring regional chefs." She gestured to different sections of her map with professional precision. "We'll organise the booths by theme rather than tradition, creating a more intuitive flow for visitors." A pause followed. Murmurs spread through the room like ripples in a pond. Mrs. Henderson, whose wrinkled hands had hosted the pie-baking tent since 1987, raised an arm slowly. Her flowered sleeve drooped as she pointed to the map. "And where exactly do the hay rides go, dear?" Charlie blinked. I hadn't budgeted for hay rides." She glanced down at her meticulous notes. "They don't really fit with the upscale aesthetic where—" The murmurs grew louder. Mr. Peterson, whose voice always seemed to carry despite his hunched posture, didn't bother raising his hand. "What about the horseshoe tournament? My great-grandfather started that in 1932. Charlie faltered, her confidence wavering as more voices joined in. "And the sack race," Jenny Thompson called out. "My kids train every year. Caleb's defending champion 3 years running." Heads nodded in agreement. Charlie opened her mouth, then closed it, suddenly feeling like she'd walked into a meeting without any preparation at all. Heat crept up her neck. Ethan cleared his throat softly beside her. She glanced at him, a silent plea in her eyes. He stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor as he moved to her side. "Look," he said, his deep voice carrying easily over the concerned murmurs. "I get the desire for a little modernization. Charlie's got great ideas about bringing new people to the festival." He gestured to her map. "But Sweetbriar isn't Chicago." He turned, addressing Charlie directly but loud enough for everyone to hear. "People don't come for food trucks or QR codes. They come for the pie contest and the kids' lantern walk, for the tug-of-war and the barn dance. We're not trying to go viral, we're trying to come together." The room murmured agreement. Charlie felt her chest tighten, not out of embarrassment, but because she could see it so clearly now, the way their memories mattered. These traditions weren't just nostalgic fluff to be brushed aside for trendy aesthetics. They were identity. Roots. The very things that had kept Sweetbriar Ridge alive while other small towns withered. She looked out at the faces watching her, familiar despite the years, expectant despite their doubts, and something shifted inside her. A recognition, perhaps, of what she'd been missing in the sleek, efficient world she'd built for herself in Chicago. She lowered her eyes, nodding slowly. "Okay." She looked back up, voice stronger. "Compromise. We keep the hay rides, sack races, horseshoes and bake-offs, all the traditions that make this festival special." She took a deep breath. "But what if we freshen them up a bit? Add a digital event map so families can plan their day. Maybe a story-sharing booth where folks can record their festival memories for the Historical Society. We could merge the new with the old, Preserve what matters while making room for growth. She turned to Mrs. Henderson with a genuine smile. And I'd never dream of moving the pie contest, Mrs. H. But what if we added a student division this year? Get the next generation involved? The older woman's face lit up. My granddaughter's been begging to enter. Across the room, faces softened. Nods replaced frowns. Ethan glanced at her, eyes warming with something that looked almost like respect. Now that, he said quietly, I can work with. The meeting progressed more smoothly after that, with Charlie carefully integrating her fresh ideas around the framework of beloved traditions. By the end, they had a comprehensive plan that honoured the festival's heritage while breathing new life into its presentation. As people filtered out, Charlie gathered her papers, shoulders finally relaxing from their defensive posture. She felt drained but oddly satisfied, like she'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. You handled that well, Ethan said as he passed her, collecting empty coffee cups. Charlie raised an eyebrow. You mean I didn't cause a riot? His lips curved in that almost smile. Something like that. He paused, then added, You listened. That means something to folks around here. Before she could respond, Mayor Liz approached, clutching her ever-present clipboard. Charlie, that bit about the story booth, brilliant. My husband's been trying to get oral histories for the library for years. She beamed. You haven't lost your touch for bringing people together. The praise warmed her unexpectedly. Thanks, Mayor Liz. I just needed a reminder of what matters here. What matters everywhere, dear? The older woman corrected gently. Community. Connection. The rest is just window dressing. She patted Charlie's arm before hurrying off to her next appointment. Once the community centre had emptied and Ethan stepped outside to take a call, Charlie found herself alone with the remains of her carefully crafted presentation. She folded the map, creasing it perhaps more sharply than necessary. I guess it's not about innovation here, she muttered to the empty room, a flicker of the old Chicago Charlie resurfacing. All those sleepless nights planning, the colour-coded sections, the research into current trends, all brushed aside for hayrides and horseshoes. It's about people, came Ethan's voice from the doorway, startling her. He'd returned silently, catching her unguarded moment. Always has been. She flushed, embarrassed to be caught in her moment of frustration. I know that, she said defensive. I just thought that you could fix us. His voice wasn't accusatory, just quietly observant. Make us better? Not fix, she protested, though the word stung with its accuracy. Enhance. Ethan crossed the room, helping her gather the last of her materials. We're not a corporate event, Charlie. We're not trying to impress investors or trend on social media. We're just trying to give people a few days where they remember who they are to each other. His words settled over her, gentle but no less pointed for their softness. She nodded, swallowing her pride. You're right. Old habits die hard, I guess. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the town square in golden light, a light breeze stirring the scent of fresh grass and distant apple trees. Charlie shouldered her tote bag, suddenly reluctant to return to Mabel's just yet. I think I'll walk for a bit, she told Ethan, who was unlocking his truck. Clear my head, he nodded, studying her face for a moment. Don't get lost, he said finally, the words carrying more meaning than their surface simplicity suggested. Not possible in Sweetbriar, she replied with a small smile. Too many people watching. As his truck pulled away, Charlie found her feet pulling her not toward Main Street, but toward the orchard that sprawled at the edge of town. The Evans family orchard had been sold years ago when her father died, but the public walking paths remained open, a beloved spot for locals to wander among the blossoming trees. The orchard welcomed her with open arms, rows of gnarled trees standing like old sentinels, their branches heavy with pink and white blossoms that swirled through the air with every breath of wind. These trees had weathered storms, droughts, and seasons of neglect, and still they bloomed. Maybe people could too. Her heeled boots sank slightly into the soft earth as she followed the winding path, her heart tugging as the trees closed around her, muffling the distant sounds of town in a cocoon of rustling leaves and birdsong. She wandered deeper, muscle memory guiding her through turns that her conscious mind had forgotten. The farther she walked, the lighter she felt, as if shedding layers of the person she'd become in Chicago, the perfect planner, the consummate professional, the woman who controlled every detail but had somehow lost control of what mattered. And then she saw it. The swing. A simple wooden plank suspended by two thick ropes from a gnarled branch, creaking softly in the wind. Weathered but still sturdy, swaying gently as if inviting her closer. She brushed her hand over the smooth wood, memories washing over her like sunlight. She and Ethan had kissed here 16 years ago, the night of her 17th birthday. Her heart had pounded so loud she was sure the stars could hear it. He'd told her she smelled like cinnamon and laughed when she blushed, his eyes crinkling at the corners, in that way that still made her stomach flip. It still works, you know. She whirled around to find Ethan standing a few yards away, hands tucked in his pockets, watching her with an unreadable expression. How did you... Saw you heading this way? He shrugged, a hint of something deeper in his eyes. Old habit, I guess. Making sure you made it back. Charlie blinked, touched by his concern despite herself. I'm fine. Just... remembering. He nodded, remaining where he stood, giving her space. This place has that effect. She sank onto the swing, palms curling around the rough rope. I haven't thought about this swing in years. A lie, and from his slight smile, he knew it. You used to read here, he said, propped against that trunk with your legs up on the swing. She hadn't realized he remembered such details. Jane Austen, mostly, and you used to tease me for it. I was jealous of Mr. Darcy. His voice was light, but something in his eyes made her heart skip. She looked away, pushing off gently with one foot to set the swing in motion. The orchard looks good. Who runs it now? Cooperative, he replied, moving closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. Several families split the work and profits. Your dad's section is managed by the Thompsons. She nodded, glad to know her father's trees were in good hands. The gentle creaking of the swing and the sweet scent of blossoms wrapped around them like a cocoon, separate from the world beyond the orchard. I'm sorry about earlier, she said suddenly. At the meeting. I should have remembered how much the traditions matter. Ethan looked surprised at her apology. You're bringing fresh eyes. We need that too. He paused. It's why they wanted you involved. Why I wanted you involved. The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to explore. Gracie's all I've got, he said unexpectedly, eyes scanning the orchard like it held answers. So, I don't take risks I can't afford. The words weren't directed at her exactly, but Charlie felt their weight nonetheless, a gentle warning perhaps, or an explanation for the careful distance he maintained. The swing creaked rhythmically as a comfortable silence settled over them. Sunlight dappled through the branches, casting shifting patterns across their faces. For just a moment, Charlie felt 16 again. Possibilities endless, heart full, the future an unwritten page. I should head back, she said finally, stopping the swing. Mabel's probably wondering where I am. He nodded, stepping back as she rose. See you tomorrow? We still need to finalize the vendor list. Tomorrow, she agreed. They walked back in companionable silence, parting at the edge of the orchard, with nothing more than a quiet goodbye and the promise of tomorrow hovering between them. That evening, back at Mabel's, the house was quiet save for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Charlie sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop abandoned beside her as she flipped through her notebook, jotting design ideas in the soft glow of her bedside lamp. Before long, she found herself sketching, not digital layouts or vendor maps, but soft, flowing designs. Lantern paths winding through the orchard, a gazebo draped with fairy lights and apple blossoms, an outdoor dance floor framed by flowering branches and softly glowing paper lanterns. She hadn't drawn like this in years, hadn't created for the pure joy of it, without client specifications or budget constraints. The lines flowed from her pencil with an ease that surprised her, as if her hand remembered a language her conscious mind had forgotten. A knock interrupted her reverie. She opened her door to find Mabel holding a steaming mug. "Thought you might want some chamomile," her grandmother said, eyes twinkling as she peered past Charlie to the sketches spread across the bed. My, haven't seen you draw like that since high school." Charlie accepted the mug with a grateful smile. "Just brainstorming." Mabel's knowing look said she wasn't fooled. "Ethan called. Said you're meeting tomorrow about vendors." "Strictly business," Charlie replied too quickly, too hopefully. Mabel smiled. "Of course, sugar." She patted Charlie's cheek before turning to leave. "By the way, you're glowing tonight. Whatever memories that orchard stirred up must have been good ones." Before Charlie could protest, Mabel was already halfway down the hall, her slippered feet shuffling against the worn floorboards. Charlie returned to her bed, sipping the fragrant tea as she studied her drawings. There was something freeing about creating without pressure, designing for a place that held her earliest memories of beauty and belonging. Another knock, softer this time, startled her from her thoughts. She opened the door to find Ethan, holding 2 white paper boxes and looking slightly uncomfortable. "Sorry to drop by so late," he said, shifting his weight. "The Daisy Chain Cafe was giving away their day-old pie slices. Thought you might need a break from world domination planning." He looked like hesitation in human form, torn between duty and desire, and maybe that's what made her heart flip. She grinned, surprised and pleased. "Only if that's from Missy's kitchen." "Is there any other kind worth eating?" He handed her a box, their fingers brushing briefly. Rather than inviting him in, a step neither seemed quite ready for, they ended up on the porch swing, paper boxes balanced on their laps, silence companionable between them. Fireflies blinked across the field like scattered stars, their gentle light reflected in the windows of the farmhouse. Charlie bit into her slice of apple crumble, the buttery crust and cinnamon-spiced filling melting on her tongue. "Mabel says I'm glowing," she said after a moment, not entirely sure why she was sharing this. Ethan smirked, fork paused halfway to his mouth. "She also says the government faked the moon landing and that her rosebushes give stock market tips." Charlie laughed, the sound escaping her more freely than it had in months. "Still, I feel lighter. Even after today's meeting disaster." He studied her profile in the porch light. "You were good in there, once you started listening." The teasing note in his voice softened the critique. "I think they'll come around to some of your ideas." She glanced at him. "You didn't have to defend me." "Didn't do it for you," he said, taking another bite of pie. "Did it for the festival." She rolled her eyes, nudging his shoulder with hers. "Okay, maybe a little for you." His admission was quiet, almost reluctant. They sat in silence again, the swing creaking gently, their shoulders now barely an inch apart. The night air carried the sweet scent of apple blossoms and the earthy richness of freshly turned garden soil. In the distance, a whippoorwill called, its haunting melody echoing across the valley. Charlie tilted her head back, gazing at the stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. "You can't see this in Chicago," she murmured. "Too many lights, too much, everything." Ethan followed her gaze upward. "One of my favorite things about living here, being able to see the stars every night." "This place," Charlie's voice softened. "It's starting to feel like it used to." Ethan's voice was low, thoughtful. "It never stopped feeling like home. Not for me." She turned her head, heart stuttering at the softness in his expression, the way the porch light caught the copper threads in his dark hair. For a moment, she could see the boy she'd loved, earnest and warm, layered beneath the man he'd become. Before she could speak, a light flicked on in the upstairs guest room window. A small silhouette danced behind the curtain, arms waving excitedly. "Gracie," Ethan explained, his expression warming further. "She's been staying with me this week while Sarah's at a photography workshop in Seattle. Mabel offered to watch her tonight so I could finish inventory at the store." "She seems like a wonderful kid," Charlie said. meaning it. "She's been painting a lot lately," Ethan said, pride evident in his voice. "You should see the walls she turned into a mural at my place, galaxy backdrop with every constellation precisely mapped. Kid's got a better eye than most adults I know." "I'd love to," she said, the words feeling both old and new on her tongue. He nodded, something like hope flickering across his features. "Maybe you can come by the store sometime. She's usually there after school, doing homework in the reading nook." "I'd like that," she replied softly. The swing creaked between them, marking the rhythm of possibilities neither was ready to name. "I should get going," Ethan said finally, gathering their empty pie boxes. "Early delivery tomorrow." Charlie walked him to the porch steps, feeling strangely reluctant to end the evening. "Thanks for the pie, and for earlier, at the meeting." He nodded, studying her face in the porch light. "See you tomorrow, Charlie." "Tomorrow," she echoed. She watched his truck disappear down the gravel drive, tail lights glowing like embers in the darkness. The night air wrapped around her, cool but not unwelcome, carrying the whispered promises of spring. That night, curled beneath her quilt, the orchard swing and shared pie still fresh in her mind, Charlie dreamed. She dreamed of fairy lights strung through apple trees, their glow catching in dark hair and reflecting in hazel eyes. Of laughter echoing across Miller's Pond, of paper lanterns drifting skyward, carrying whispered wishes that bloomed in spring, of Ethan's hand brushing her cheek, his voice low and rough as he said her name, the way he used to say it, like it was something precious, something worth savouring. She dreamed of his mouth finding hers beneath a canopy of blossoms, tasting of cinnamon and possibility. She dreamed of his hands, strong and sure, tracing patterns against her skin, awakening nerves that had been dormant for too long. She woke with her heart pounding, her lips tingling with the memory of a kiss that hadn't happened. Yet. Sunlight streamed through her window, painting gold across her rumpled sheets. Outside, birds chattered in the maple tree, greeting the day with enthusiasm she suddenly shared. Rolling onto her side, Charlie caught sight of her sketchbook, pages filled with festival designs that looked nothing like her sleek Chicago events. These were whimsical, organic, rooted in tradition but blooming with fresh possibility, much like the feelings taking tentative root in her heart. And as dawn painted the orchard in hues of gold and promise, Charlie Evans began to realize that she wasn't just helping a festival. She was rediscovering a life she hadn't realized she missed. Chapter 4. Sweet Memories. Sour Truths. Rain fell in soft, steady drizzles the next morning, veiling Sweetbriar Ridge in a misty hush. The orchard shimmered under the overcast sky, petals clinging to branches like delicate secrets. From the window of Mabel's kitchen, Charlie watched it all with a warm cup of coffee cupped in her hands, steam fogging the glass. She wasn't used to quiet mornings anymore. Back in Chicago, her days began with alarms and inbox pings, breakfast skipped, meetings stacked like building blocks. But here, there was time for coffee, time for breathing, and time for thinking, which could be dangerous. She turned away from the window as footsteps creaked on the porch. Ethan stepped inside, shaking off raindrops, hair damp and curling slightly at the edges. He carried a toolkit in one hand, a rolled blueprint in the other. "Mabel said the shed roof's leaking again," Charlie smirked. "What a coincidence. She told me to organize the attic. I think she's assigning us co-chair bonding projects." Ethan shrugged, smiling faintly. "Could be worse." She nodded toward the blueprint. "What's that?" "Festival layout. Thought I'd sketch out the booth placements. Figured we could avoid more debates if it's all on paper." "I'm not the enemy, Ethan." "I know," he said, quieter than expected. "We just see things differently." Charlie sighed. "I guess that's true for more than just festival planning." A silence stretched between them, comfortable yet weighted with unspoken words. Rain pattered against the windows, filling the space where conversation should be. "We need to visit the Millers today," Ethan said finally. "They're providing the honey for the festival, but Jim's threatening to back out if we don't resolve that location issue." Charlie nodded, grateful for the shift to business. "I'll get my raincoat." That girl's glowing again, Mabel muttered, as she shuffled into the kitchen, passing Charlie with a knowing wink. Must be the company she's keeping. Charlie felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's just the festival planning, Mabel. Her grandmother hummed, unconvinced. And I'm just making tea, not eavesdropping. She patted Ethan's arm as she passed. Don't forget your umbrella, dear. She always did hate getting her hair wet. 20 minutes later, they were splashing through puddles on the gravel path that led to Miller's apiary. The rain had softened to a gentle mist, turning the surrounding fields into a watercolour painting of greens and greys. So, Charlie ventured, Gracie seems to be settling in well with you. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the path ahead, but something in his expression softened. It wasn't easy at first. After Sarah died, he paused, swallowing hard. Car accident. 3 years ago. Gracie was only 5. Charlie's heart constricted. I'm so sorry, Ethan, I didn't know. No reason you would. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could hear the carefully controlled pain beneath it. Sarah was a single mum. Gracie's father was never in the picture. I was listed as guardian in Sarah's will, but there was some debate with our aunt in Portland who thought Gracie should be with her. Charlie stepped carefully around a deep puddle. That must have been awful. 14 months of court battles. His jaw tightened at the memory. Gracie was in foster care for part of it. She barely spoke when she finally came to live with me. Wouldn't even look at her paintbrushes. Charlie's eyes stung with unexpected tears. And now she's creating murals. A small, proud smile touched his lips. Took a lot of patience. A lot of nights sitting up with nightmares. But yeah, now she's painting again, reading voraciously, even joined the science club at school. You're good with her, Charlie said softly. Anyone can see that. He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his expression. Some days I'm terrified I'm messing it all up. I own a bookstore, Charlie. I wasn't exactly prepared for raising a kid. Maybe that's exactly what makes you good at it, she offered. You're not trying to fit her into some predetermined idea of what she should be. Ethan looked away, but not before she caught the flicker of gratitude in his eyes. His shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying alone for too long. The Miller farm appeared ahead, a collection of weathered buildings nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills. Colourful beehives dotted the nearby field like tiny houses, their bright blues and yellows a stark contrast to the overcast sky. Jim Miller greeted them at the gate, his weathered face creased with concern beneath the brim of his rain hat. Thought you might not make it in this weather, he said, ushering them toward a covered porch. Come on in, Ruth's got coffee brewing. The warm, honey-scented kitchen welcomed them, Ruth Miller's generous smile matching the coziness of the space. Charlie had barely seated herself at the oak table when Ruth placed a steaming mug and a plate of honey biscuits before her. Now, Jim said, settling across from them, about this booth placement. I've been at the West Entrance for 40 years. My father was there before me. And now I hear you're moving us to make room for some fancy artisan section. Charlie opened her mouth to explain, but before she could speak, a loud buzz filled the air. She turned to see a swarm of bees hovering near the open window, likely confused by the sudden rainstorm. Ruth! Jim called, starting to rise. The new hive's swarming! Before anyone could react further, several bees found their way inside, disoriented and circling the kitchen. Charlie flinched as one flew dangerously close to her face. In an instant, Ethan was beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders as he gently guided her toward the door. Easy, he murmured, his body shielding hers. Don't panic, they're just confused. His nearness sent a rush of warmth through her that had nothing to do with fear. She could smell the rain on his jacket, feel the steady strength of his arm around her. For a heartbeat, she leaned into him, allowing herself the comfort of his protection. Jim rushed to close the window while Ruth calmly retrieved a small spray bottle of sugar water, misting it near the bees to settle them. Sorry about that, she called. The new queen's been restless. Once the excitement died down, They returned to the table, though Charlie noticed Ethan sat closer to her than before, his eyes occasionally scanning for any remaining bees. "As I was saying," Jim continued, "about this booth placement." "Mr. Miller," Charlie interjected gently, "I owe you an apology. In my initial plans, I was focusing on flow and aesthetics without considering the history and meaning behind the traditional placements. Ethan helped me understand what I was missing." Jim's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "We've revised the plan," she continued, unrolling the blueprint Ethan had brought. "Your honey booth stays exactly where it's always been, but we'd like to enhance it with some better lighting and perhaps a demonstration area where you could show the extraction process. People love that interactive element." Jim's expression shifted from suspicion to interest as Charlie outlined her ideas. By the time they finished their coffee, he was nodding enthusiastically, even suggesting additional features for the honey display. On the walk back to town, the rain ceased entirely, leaving behind a glistening landscape and the fresh, clean scent of washed earth. "That went well," Charlie observed. "Thanks for the bee rescue, by the way." Ethan chuckled. "Any time, though I should warn you I'm terrified of spiders. So, if we encounter any of those, you're on your own." Charlie laughed, the sound bright in the misty air. "Noted. Big, strong Ethan Walker, felled by a tiny spider." "Not tiny," he corrected with mock seriousness. "The big hairy ones with too many legs." "So 8 legs is too many?" "Exactly." Their laughter faded into comfortable silence as they approached the town square. The community centre lights were on, suggesting the budget committee meeting had already started. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Mayor Liz stood at the front of the room, her usually cheerful face drawn with concern as she addressed the gathered committee members. "I'm afraid there's no way around it," she was saying. "The county has cut our funding by 20%. We'll need to trim the festival budget accordingly." Ethan and Charlie exchanged worried glances as they took seats near the back. "The fireworks display will have to be scaled back," Mayor Liz continued, "and we may need to reconsider the stage rental for the music performances." "But the fireworks are the grand finale," someone protested, "and the bands are already booked." The discussion quickly devolved into heated debate, with committee members arguing over which elements could be sacrificed. Charlie listened, mind racing with possible solutions. Finally, she stood. "What if we don't cut anything?" All eyes turned to her. "I have contacts in Chicago," she explained. "Corporate sponsors who might be interested in supporting a charming local festival. I could make some calls." "I don't think that's the right approach," Ethan interrupted, rising beside her. His voice was measured, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Charlie turned to him, surprised by his objection. "It's just sponsorship, Ethan. They'd get their logo on some banners, maybe naming rights to the music stage." "It's not the help I mind," he said, his expression troubled. "It's what comes with it. Strings have a way of tightening before you notice they're there." He glanced around the room. "I've seen what happens to towns that go down this road. First it's just logos, then it's suggestions about the events, the vendors, the image. Before you know it, we're performing some sanitized version of ourselves for visitors who want quaint, but not too quaint." "That's not fair," Charlie protested, heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm trying to help." "I know you are," he acknowledged, his tone softening. "But this festival isn't about maximizing profit or expanding our reach. It's about celebrating who we are." The room had fallen silent, all eyes on their exchange. "This town is struggling, Ethan," Charlie said, her voice low. "Pride can't patch a leaking roof." His expression shuttered. "And losing our identity won't save us either." Mayor Liz cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should take a short break and resume this discussion when emotions are less heated." As the meeting dispersed, Charlie strode outside, needing air and distance. The rain had cleared entirely now, leaving behind a pearl-grey sky and the promise of evening stars. She made her way to a bench near the gazebo, sinking onto it with a frustrated sigh. She didn't look up when Ethan's familiar footsteps approached, but she felt the bench shift as he sat beside her. "I shouldn't have said that," she admitted after a long moment. About the town struggling. It was cruel. No, he said quietly. It was honest. And you're not wrong. She glanced at him, surprised. We are struggling, he continued. The mill closing hit us hard. Young families are moving away for better jobs. I know that. He ran a hand through his hair. I've watched other towns try to save themselves by becoming something they're not. It never ends well. I get that, Charlie conceded. But there has to be middle ground. He nodded slowly. Maybe there is. As dusk settled over the square, fireflies began to emerge, their gentle lights blinking like earthbound stars among the bushes surrounding the gazebo. One drifted between them, its glow illuminating the small space they shared. Look, Charlie whispered, momentarily distracted from their disagreement. I haven't seen fireflies since the last summer I was here. Ethan's expression softened as he watched her delight. They come out every year, he said. Some things don't change. The fireflies multiplied as darkness deepened, creating a magical display that reminded Charlie of childhood evenings spent chasing the glowing insects with glass jars, always releasing them before bedtime because her father insisted they needed their freedom. I used to think they were fairy lights, she admitted. Part of me still wants to believe that. I used to wish on them, Charlie added, voice hushed, as if they were carrying my hopes to someone who might be watching. Ethan smiled, genuine this time. Gracie thinks the same thing. She insists they're how fairies communicate. The mention of Gracie eased the remaining tension between them. How is she after the painting incident? Already planning a new one, he said, pride evident in his voice. She said the rain gave her a better idea, something about tears making rainbows. She's a special kid. She is. He hesitated, then added, She drew something for you yesterday. It's in my truck if you want to see it. Curious, Charlie nodded, following him to where his truck was parked across the square. He reached inside and pulled out a colourful sheet of construction paper, handing it to her somewhat sheepishly. In bright crayon strokes, Gracie had drawn 3 figures standing beneath an apple tree. A tall man with dark hair, a woman with long blonde waves, and a small girl between them. The man and woman were holding hands. Across the top, in careful lettering, she'd written, Uncle Ethan, Miss Charlie and me at the Apple Blossom Festival. Charlie's heart constricted as she traced the joined hands with her fingertip. She has quite an imagination. Kids see things differently, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. Possibilities instead of complications. Their eyes met over the drawing, something unspoken passing between them. Charlie handed it back, careful not to crease the paper. Tell her I love it, and that I can't wait to see her new mural. The walk back to Mabel's was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The evening had cleared completely now, stars emerging in a velvet sky. Crickets chirped in the tall grass along the roadside, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. I'll figure out the budget, Charlie said as they reached the driveway. Without corporate sponsors, there must be another solution. Ethan nodded. We'll figure it out together. At the porch steps, he hesitated. I've got to head back. Gracie's waiting. But there's something in the attic you might want to see. Box labeled Charlie, high school. Mabel mentioned it when she asked me to fix that loose floorboard up there. Curious, Charlie bid him good night and made her way to the narrow attic stairs. The space was cluttered but clean, illuminated by a single bare bulb hanging from the rafters. The scent of cedar and old paper hung in the air, overlaid with the faint sweetness of mothballs. Floorboards creaked beneath her feet, whispering secrets of generations who had stored their memories in this quiet space. She found the box tucked beneath the eaves, a simple cardboard container with her name scrawled in her grandmother's handwriting. Inside, beneath yearbooks and graduation memorabilia, she found a leather-bound journal she'd forgotten existed. The clasp was stiff with disuse, but it opened to reveal pages filled with her teenage handwriting, thoughts and dreams spilled across the paper in purple ink. Charlie settled onto the dusty floorboards, turning pages slowly, reacquainting herself with the girl she'd been. Entries about school and friends gave way to increasingly frequent mentions of Ethan, Their first date, their conversations about the future, her conflicted feelings as college acceptance letters began to arrive. One entry, dated just weeks before she left for Northwestern, made her breath catch. "I love it here. I love him. But I'm terrified that if I stay, I'll always wonder what might have been. And if I go, I'll always wonder the same thing about us, about this place that's in my blood. Sometimes I dream of coming back after college, opening that event planning business right here in Sweetbriar, building a life with Ethan, a forever kind of life. But dreams are scary when they're too perfect, too complete. What if I'm not enough to make them real?" Charlie closed the journal, her throat tight with emotion. She'd forgotten how much she'd once wanted this life, not as a consolation prize or a retreat from failure, but as her first and truest dream. She clutched the journal to her chest, tears spilling silently down her cheeks, not with sadness, but because of how much she still wanted what she thought she'd outgrown. The realization washed over her like a wave, leaving her breathless. All these years, she'd been running from the very thing her heart had always wanted. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the rain had washed away more than just dust from the world. Charlie arrived early at the bookstore, Ethan's invitation to see Gracie's mural providing a convenient excuse to see him again. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating shelves of books that reached toward the high ceiling. The scent of paper, coffee, and the faint sweetness of vanilla enveloped her. "We're not open yet," came Ethan's voice from somewhere among the stacks, followed by his appearance at the end of an aisle. His expression shifted from polite dismissal to surprise when he saw her. "Charlie, you're early." "I can come back," she offered, suddenly uncertain. "No, it's fine. Come in." He gestured toward the back of the store. "Gracie's upstairs putting final touches on her mural. I've got coffee brewing if you want some." She followed him to a small kitchenette tucked behind the checkout counter, watching as he poured rich, dark coffee into mismatched mugs. "I found the journal," she said, accepting the steaming cup. "In the attic." His hand stilled momentarily. "Ah. I wrote about wanting to come back here someday, about starting an event planning business in Sweetbriar." She wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic. "I'd completely forgotten that was once my dream." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "Dreams change." "Do they?" Her voice trembled, just a breath short of breaking. "Or do we just convince ourselves they should?" He shifted his gaze to the floor, jaw tight. The mug in his hand trembled almost imperceptibly before he set it down with careful precision. Something flashed across his face, longing perhaps or regret, before he mastered it. Before he could respond, the sound of running footsteps on the stairs announced Gracie's arrival. She burst into the room, face lighting up when she spotted Charlie. "You came! Come see my painting!" She grabbed Charlie's hand, tugging her toward the stairs. "I fixed it and made it even better." Charlie allowed herself to be led upstairs to a cozy apartment above the bookstore. The main room served as both living area and studio, with large windows flooding the space with natural light. One entire wall had been transformed into Gracie's canvas, a breathtaking mural of an apple orchard at twilight, with fairy lights strung between the trees and fireflies hovering among the blossoms. "It's absolutely beautiful," Charlie breathed, genuinely awed by the child's talent. "The rain part actually helped," Gracie explained excitedly, pointing to sections where she'd incorporated water droplets that caught and refracted light. "See? I made the raindrops into little prisms." "It's magical," Charlie said, kneeling to examine the details at eye level with the little girl. "You're a true artist, Gracie." "Uncle Ethan says artists see the world differently," Gracie confided. "He says that's why you're so good at making parties special, because you see the magic everyone else misses." Charlie glanced at Ethan, who stood in the doorway watching them, his expression unreadable. "He said that?" Gracie nodded solemnly. "He kept all your letters too, in a box under his bed." "Gracie," Ethan's voice held a warning note, but there was no anger in it, only embarrassment. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, eyes suddenly finding interest in a distant corner of the room. "Well, you did," Gracie insisted. "And the pictures, even the one where you're making that funny face because a bee almost stung you." Charlie's heart skipped. He'd kept her letters, the ones she'd sent during that first semester at Northwestern, when homesickness and doubt had plagued her, the ones he'd never answered. "Why don't you get your science project to show Charlie?" Ethan suggested, clearly trying to change the subject. Once Gracie had scampered off to her room, he ran a hand through his hair. Kids and their lack of filter. "You kept them?" Charlie asked softly. He met her gaze, something like defiance in his eyes. "Yeah, but you never wrote back." By the time they arrived, you'd already posted pictures from fraternity parties and lakeshore gatherings. You seemed happy. Moved on. He shrugged, but the casualness didn't reach his eyes. "I figured you were just being nice, tying up loose ends." "I wasn't," she said, the admission difficult even now. "I missed you. I missed this place." A silence stretched between them, filled with years of misunderstandings and missed chances. "I never stopped wondering," he said finally, his voice low. "What might have happened if you'd stayed, or if I'd followed, if things had been different." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in the morning light. Gracie's return broke the moment, her arms full of a volcano model made from papier-mâché and paint. Charlie knelt to admire it, listening as the little girl explained the chemical reaction that would make it erupt during the science fair. Later, as Charlie prepared to leave, Ethan walked her to the door of the bookstore. In the quiet moment before she stepped outside, their hands brushed, a whisper of contact that sent warmth spiraling through her fingers and up her arm. For a heartbeat, neither moved away. Then, as if by mutual agreement, both pulled back slightly, not quite ready to acknowledge the current that flowed between them. "See you at the committee meeting tonight?" Ethan asked, his voice a shade deeper than usual. Charlie nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to look directly at him. "I'll be there. With budget solutions that don't involve corporate takeovers, I promise." His smile reached his eyes this time. "I never doubted you'd figure it out." As she walked back through the town square, Charlie felt lighter somehow, as if reading her old journal had unlocked something long dormant inside her. The girl who had dreamed of building a life in Sweetbriar, of fairy lights and forever love, hadn't disappeared after all. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to come home.